were talking about some client stuff and we were finding my GI map. That's what we're going to go over today. This GI map's a little bit old, but I felt comfortable sharing my information and I was going to talk to them and I want Ashley and then whoever else wants to kind of chime in. But um, the big things I wanted to start with is me working on a GI map was one of the best things for my health. I would say around this time, before consulting with Ashley, I had really high cholesterol. I was on cholesterol inhibiting medication because I was not looking at root causes. I was not eating any fiber. I was eating maybe one banana a day and no vegetables. And I've had eczema off and on my whole life. I had got rid of it for some time, but right around the time I did this GI map, I was having a flare up. I was having IBS-like symptoms, things that I just really wasn't accustomed to. So, me digging in, looking through this, getting expertise from Ashley, it's really helped my health. And then honestly, it really leveled up my coaching as well. So, I thought this would be cool to kind of walk through this and then um, all of us kind of chime in and give our expertise as coaches. So, Ashley, whenever you are ready, if you don't mind sharing, that would be awesome.
You have to make it available for me to do
There we
that.
go. So you should be good to present now. And I want to talk to this, but Ashley does all of our GI maps. So anybody here who maybe is not in the program, I'm not the GI expert, okay? So I may have more layman's terms in my understanding, and I will have everybody else kind of expand upon that. Um, The way that I interpret this when I'm looking through these, and Ashley, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but like these pathogens, when we look at a GI map, these are things that are potentially more acute, is my understanding. So we could have like Salmonella or E. coli, something that we could be exposed to from like fecal contamination, from food or various means. Usually these are
Water.
acute water. These are acute when if you're having high amounts of these, potentially could be in the ER, and it's not something that we would see like on a GI map unless it's trace amounts and your body's working through that. Was that how you interpret that?
Well, I'll kind of expand a little on that. So these pathogens specifically are the gene of the toxin. So on this map, the results show a gene of the toxin. So if E. coli were to show positive here, it means that the gene of the toxin is found in your intestine. That does not mean the toxin is being expressed. And so you have to have both a positive test and clinical symptoms. So somebody could have a very high salmonella and feel totally fine. I try to explain this kind of like, and I know not even everybody understands this either, but kind of like if you've had chicken pox or EBV or something and it's laying dormant, it's not necessarily actively being expressed. So I have definitely had clients have these that feel totally fine, and because the toxin isn't being expressed, they're not actually having clinical symptoms. That said, to kind of go back to what you said a little bit, some of them will show up and not overgrown. A lot of it is most of these are yes, acute, and your immune system, you're going to process it just like you would a cold. Like your body has to like work through it and process through it. And sometimes, like I said, if the toxin is not being expressed, then it's really just the gene is there that again the body works through. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that I wasn't as well versed on this is, so you're saying this is almost like an antibody or an antigen that can sit at the gene level. So if I've been exposed to salmonella at some point and it's no longer bothering me, I could still have like remnants of that at a gene level in my
So
intestine.
kind of. So like this is based on DNA detection at the gene level, not the protein level. So it just means there's a potential infection, not gene activation. And so, like I said, you have to have both clinical symptoms and a positive test. So it measures the toxin genes, not necessarily that the toxin is being produced. Um, and so sometimes it's kind of a non-event. Like sometimes people see this and like, oh my gosh, I have E. coli. And I'm like, and you feel fine and your body's gonna like process that. And sometimes people will hold on to the gene. Like sometimes you can express the gene without actually the toxins for long periods of time. I've also had a lot of people, especially if you work on your immunity, because your immune system likes to fight off even the toxin genes. Like your body will try to process it.
Interesting. So, this piece could also tie into our intestinal health markers when we're looking at maybe low SIG-A and other immune.
100%. So I always look at, okay, what risk factors for having the gene are going to be like any other growths, going to be low digestive capacity, low immunity, low commensals, opportunistic dysbiosis. Any of those things are going to make it worse, potentially worse.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's awesome. And as we work down through this, these getting out of the pathogens and kind of looking at I believe, is it the H. pylori that comes up next?
Yes.
Yes. Something that just kind of, I guess I want to speak to from like a client aspect. I think I've had H. pylori for a really long time. Um, the thing that I noticed with that is I've had acid reflux, or I did from like the age of like 10 to like, I think I did this when I was like 31 years old. Um, and things that I really noticed that like my ability to digest protein. Uh, I had a lot of issues with that. And then I was also deficient in a certain vitamin. So like specifically my vitamin B12 and my iron was super low. Um, when looking at H. pylori, Ashley, so gram-negative bacteria, is that correct? And it burrows into the stomach lining and it lowers digestive capacity, can create ulcers, and what else would you say kind of fits within this
Yeah.
paradigm of bacteria?
Yeah, so a few things I'll say. I mean, one is the not overgrown, but the bacteria itself, yeah, it tends to settle in the stomach. And so when we think of motility, motility goes this way. So we treat H. pylori first because you need to treat it by itself before you get to the intestines because it has influence on the intestines. Um, it about 50% of the population actually has it present at lower levels. So it's a very, very common bacteria, but it can wreak havoc and be very ugly. And I say very ugly, I don't mean like having the flu very ugly. I mean like impacting so many things systemically in terms of like your digestion, absorption, like even down to your sleep. And I'll talk about that. I mean, it impacts so many things in your body when it's overgrown. So ulcers, so one of the, I mean, you mentioned digestion. The biggest thing that it tends to cause is low stomach acid, which surprisingly can give reflux. And I think that's counter intuitive for most people, but low stomach acid impacts a lot of how you're digesting food and consequently like the can give that reflux. That reflux is one of the most common symptoms people feel. That doesn't mean everyone does, but most common symptoms. It can cause stomach ulcers, chronic gastritis, so inflammation of the stomach, and it's a risk factor for stomach cancer. Um, so symptoms, classic symptoms, like I said, reflux, abdominal pain, nausea, feeling really full with not a lot of food. So that's another common one that I get a lot with H. pylori. So loss of appetite. I very, very, very rarely see this, but vomiting is also one that could be possible. But what's interesting more so to me about H. pylori, because it's in the stomach and we, again, motility goes this way, it has such an influence on so many other things that ultimately it can cause digestive inadequacies and malabsorptions of minerals downstream. So it ultimately can cause gas and bloating, histamine symptoms, diarrhea, constipation, fatigue, depression, anxiety, insomnia, skin manifestations, iron deficiency, fertility issues, autoimmunity. So literally, like I said, it's ugly or can be ugly. And maybe not necessarily, like I said, like you feel terrible with the flu, but just on how much impact it has on so many other parts of the body.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think some of the things that I was noticing um, was that digestive insufficiency. Historically, it was eating a lot of protein, and the older I got, I felt like I was potentially not absorbing that, or I couldn't process food as well. To my understanding, that the stomach acid decreases as we age, correct? So I would say if we're looking at like our demographic of people on this call, we're probably working with women in their mid 30s up to, I don't know, I've met with some of our clients who are 70 plus. So I would say we're kind of in that age group where stomach acid may be something that a lot of clients are battling against. The other piece that I see is, when we look at that digestive piece, I think a lot of people undermine what good digestion is, and we just kind of live in this world of very poor digestion. The other thing that I was curious on, your stance on this is, if we look at H. pylori and, if I'm looking at blood work, a lot of times I may see like high homocysteines, I may see low iron, low ferritin. I think a lot of practitioners will kind of try to supplement their way out of that without looking at a GI map. And ultimately, it's like a root cause. We should probably get in here and look at why we're deficient in vitamins and minerals versus just trying to take iron until we're constipated or overdo our B vitamin supplementation. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. So like H. pylori is actually one of the biggest things that causes low iron. So like iron is a really big one. But you're right, B12, methylation, other things like well, I mean, again, this goes with iron, but like anemia, hemoglobin hematocrit can be influenced. It can influence inflammation markers. So any of that, and then just vitamin and mineral absorption stuff, magnesium, zinc, calcium, folate, sometimes even liver stuff, sometimes thyroid, sometimes blood sugar. I mean, yeah, like I said, it's ugly.
So the last thing on this, and I'm just trying to connect the dots for people listening to this call. So if we potentially are exposed to some sort of pathogen and we have H. pylori and we have a low stomach acid, that's giving that pathogen a better environment to thrive and live in our gut. Am I correct on that? My thought
Correct.
process there?
Correct. Yes.
So, yeah, and if we're looking at immunity, like we probably don't want overgrowth of H. pylori. And I think you told me this is like H. pylori can be passed by like sharing utensils or water, or kissing. So, like if I have H. pylori, most likely my wife has H. pylori, and then my children probably have H. pylori because we're all, sharing drinks and food. So it's
Yeah.
something that people should be
So
mindful of, right?
for sure. And I tell everybody if theirs is overgrown or if you're going to treat it, there can be other reasons you might treat it if it's not overgrown. But if you're going to treat it, I always tell people if there's anybody you're kissing or, swapping spit with in some sort of way, then they should be tested. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean theirs is overgrown. And so, especially like I get this a lot with like people with kids and they're like, oh, we share waters and stuff like that. I would say, and this is important. So, this is a really detailed, specific, accurate test of the stool. It gets in the really nitty gritty. So it can test H. pylori at really low levels. If you're to go to your clinical doctor and get H. pylori tested, typically it's a positive or negative. So you're not going to get like what the actual number is, which I would say is a catch-22. It's tough. And also a lot of their tests are not as sensitive in what I would call a good way sensitive. That said, a lot of times with kids, they usually have more robust immune systems, or, their bodies are young. They're not dealing with as much inflammation and stuff like that. And so they probably, even if it's exposed in their system, it's at a low enough level that it may not be impacting them. Now, that said, I've had clients who are like, have overgrown H. pylori, and they're like, oh my gosh, my kid is dealing with all sorts of stomach stuff. Well, that could be, it may not be, but obviously getting them tested. And so, a simple way, it doesn't mean everybody has to do a GI map. Yes, that is fascinating and great and the best information, but it can be as simple as maybe you just test to see if it's positive or negative, to see if somebody else's is overgrown, because you don't want to spend the money and time and effort to kill it off to get it right back from your spouse or whatever. But yes, it is easily transferred, which is why it gets its own section, and which is why 50% of people have it present because it's very easily transferred.
We got a question in here from Kim. So she said, my husband did a breath test and it was negative. Is a breath test an accurate way to test?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think stool's better, to be honest. I think a stool test is a better test. It's interesting because I've worked with a lot of doctors through the years, and this is true in general with doctors. They kind of have their way of doing things and tend to saddle behind them. In my experience, a stool test is the best test. That doesn't mean, of course, if it's like highly overgrown, it can show it. I don't think the breath test is as sensitive.
Yeah, and I really like what you say around like prescribing or practice. doctors don't do medicine, they practice. So everybody has their way of doing it. So it's not necessarily wrong. Or, there just may be conflicting data from somebody who wants to do a GI map versus you can check H. pylori in blood as well, as to my understanding. I would
Yeah.
assume that's probably not as accurate as GI map is, if you've ever done one, they're pretty disgusting. So I would assume like, getting your stool sample is going to be a much more accurate way of looking at something
It
like
is, especially through the stool. Again, blood, I mean, if somebody has it like highly overgrown, for sure, blood might show something, but specifically, we're like looking at the intestinal tract, right? And so it is just like I said, it's the gold standard in my book. It's the best option, for sure. But that doesn't mean that there's not some benefit. And like I said, I have worked with several doctors that are like sold by their breath test or their blood test. But again, if and I say this because this is true for a lot of people. If money is a factor, and you want to test your family, then typically insurance will cover an H. pylori test through your doctor. You probably, I mean, some doctors are better than others, but you probably won't be able to sway how they test it. They probably have their way of testing. But again, insurance will probably cover it, and it's a pretty quick to get back test. Any of the ones that you're going to do through a clinical doctor.
awesome.
You can also, I mean, like I can also order just an H. pylori stool test through the lab, so that's also an option.
Awesome. Thank you so much for expanding on that. Let's get into commensals. And I want to give my layman's terms of how I describe commensals, and I want you to go deeper on this. So, the way I think about this is like, you know, we'll get into dysbiotic bacteria, but I consider like this almost like a garden, and we have to maintain our garden. I think of commensal bacteria as almost like flowers, and we probably want like an even distribution of flowers, like in our little garden. And then potentially, if say we have too much of one, it may come in and create havoc amongst our ecosystem here. And then I think about the dysbiotic bacteria as almost like weeds. That's the way I describe it, and they can be problematic, and certain weeds can impact that whole ecosystem as well. Something that I remember looking at this GI map is, a lot of the stuff was in the green, but I tend to be more leaning towards insufficiency dysbiosis. So my layman's terms of that is I don't have enough of those flowers in my garden, and I'm probably not giving it the correct amount of fertilizers. So polyphenols, enough fiber. Um, Things that you pointed out to me and I wasn't as familiar with is like your akkermansia and some of the specific things that I was dealing with. So I'm be very open with everybody on this call. So I have diabetes in my family. I have really had issues controlling my glucose. At the time of this test, I was on 1,500 milligrams of metformin, and I was still running a really high fasting glucose. Um, can you talk about like maybe some of these specific strains, and if I'm on the right track here, acromancy does have some impact on blood glucose, correct, and how we regulate our blood sugar?
It does. Yeah, it does. So again, I'll kind of use. I kind of like the garden weeds. It's interesting. I probably need more analogies to use in in how I talk about things. But so how I talk about this, and I'll kind of talk about them a little separately. But like your commensals are your healthy bacteria. And you want them in your gut. They help create this mucosal layer around your intestine that helps create a barrier. So if you've done a GI map, you've heard me say this. So our intestines are semi-permeable. So they're made for things to flow in and out of them, but only the things that we want to flow in and out of them. And so our body has protections to help protect it. One of those things, I oversimplify this, but like are like cell junctions and like part of our gut barrier. The other piece of that is this mucosal layer that we want thick and healthy. That thick and healthy are these commensal bacteria. Like he said, like polyphenols and fiber feed the mucin that help create that barrier. And it is one, if we do not have those barriers, if those cells are coming apart, then bigger bacteria, viruses, pathogens, parasites can get in there, right? Just think of it simply as the doors open. Same thing, that mucosal layer is not thick and healthy, it's too thin, so then bigger things come in. So this is one of the things that's helped creating that barrier from bacteria overgrowth and from parasites and all these things that we don't want that wreak havoc, from H. pylori overgrowth or whatever. Because think of it, if we are most optimal, if we have a thick and healthy and our cells are close together and our immunity is good and our digestion's good, then we can kiss somebody with H. pylori and our body will fight it off or keep it at a low level. So like think of that as just an immune system sort of piece. So this is creating that healthy barrier and protection. I always say I first look at this a whole, like you said. Let's look at it a whole and see what your overall balance looks like. And I would agree, his lean toward the low side, which if they're all low or generally low, then it's what we call insufficiency dysbiosis. You don't have a protection, and it is one, not the only, but one of the ways that you are what I say more of a petri dish for overgrowth and parasites and whatever. So I look at it as a whole first to see what kind of protection we look like. And I don't know time-wise that we have time to go into each of them, but generally there's a lot of different benefits. I do when you do a GI map, I'll go over them, especially if they're high or low. So like I'll just briefly touch on some of these. So like the Brachyrodes fragilis, it's good for your immune system. It's anti-inflammatory. It's antibacterial. Bifidobacterium, really good for your immune system. It produces GABA, which is neurotransmitters for the brain, and lactate and acetate and linoleic acid that are anti-carcinogen and anti-diabetic and anti-obesity and stuff like that. So then we have enterococcus. It's good for that mucosal layer. It's good for bactericidins, which kill off pathogens. Anyway, so on. I don't think we need to go through all of them, but like they all have different things that they help and fight, mostly fighting off pathogens or helping create balance or helping like lactobacillus helps you metabolize lactose. Oftentimes, if this is low, I'm like, you're probably not metabolizing lactose very well. Like super common. There are certain ones that are, again, not always, but are like, ooh, this one can drop down if you have a high alcohol intake. So there's certain things that individually can influence them. The other things that can influence this are if you do already have overgrowth from the bacteria. We haven't gotten to this section, but the bacteria that we don't necessarily need, this can also pull them in different directions if your body is not well protected. So sometimes, a lot of times I say, what you eat has a huge influence on your commensals, but that doesn't mean there aren't other factors. Like if somehow you went through a period of like high antibiotics or whatever, that then you are open to some overgrowth and then you have overgrowth or parasites, then that's going to pull and affect these healthy bacteria that are trying to fight for you. So if you have a lot of inflammation in your intestines, that's going to pull them different ways. One of the ones I see a lot with Akkermansia is H. pylori can largely influence Akkermansia, or if your Akkermansia is really high, it actually feeds H. pylori. So it's like feeding H. pylori. So when I say a high Akkermansia and high H. pylori, I'm like, oh, okay, we need balance all over the place because it's just aggravating it more. A lot of these, when they are balanced and healthy, produce short chain fatty acids, which produce butyrate, which help protect the gut. So, again, lots of good things for that mucosal barrier and your tight junctions and fighting off colorectal cancer and things like that. Anyway, hopefully that's helpful. I'm happy to go more detail. Just want to be
No,
mindful of time.
no, I don't want you to have to go too far in depth, and I appreciate the over explanation on some of these things. So that's great. Some of the things that I am curious on, and what I see a lot of clients come in is like we ask like a detailed supplements. What are you taking? And I see a lot of times people like blindly taking probiotics. Would you? My thought process on this is, you probably want to take targeted probiotics based off of the GI map because we can create imbalances of some of these beneficial bacteria. Say, like lactobacillus, I see so many people just blindly supplementing that. My understanding is, target specific probiotics and then essentially like giving that prebiotic or that fertilizer to my garden to kind of beef these up. And then supplement those probiotics based off of what you need. Would you be in agreement with that?
Yes and no. I will say, probiotics are interesting because even though, yes, to some degree, supplementing a specific one can be helpful, it's actually doesn't fully work that way. It's not like if I give you Akkermansia, then it's like putting Akkermansia into your gut. It's really help foster the growth of Akkermansia. And I know that sounds a little again, counterintuitive there. So I don't know that necessarily taking a well-rounded probiotic is necessarily going to throw things off as much as I do think targeting things specifically is helpful if they're already off. I also think it's important, like if you're going to take a probiotic with antibiotics, it really depends on what antibiotic as to what probiotic I might recommend to help balance that out. And I do think that's really important to take probiotics when you're taking antibiotics. And so I do think there's certain things that are important to, yes, be mindful of what kind of probiotics. And yes, depending on what's going on, I will recommend certain probiotics for certain things. Like if you need help with your gut barrier specifically, there are certain probiotics that I will look at for that. I also agree that the better option long term is to eat well and have those natural prebiotics. So, like eating those fermented foods and those prebiotics through your food, once we get balanced, that is one of the best things you can do.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I think we hit this, on a broad view, and let's roll down into this next section. So, the thing that I was surprised with, and when I looked at this and I learned a lot more about this, I think most of my digestive issues were due to my H. pylori. When you look at like these overgrowths, and we don't have to go overly in depth on these, but seeing just one overgrown here, would you say that this is somewhat of a healthy environment, and I'm probably dealing more with H. pylori and insufficiency dysbiosis than overgrowth of dysbiotic bacteria?
100%. And I also think that, I mean, interestingly, there are ones, and you don't have them, but there are ones that I'm more likely to see overgrown with H. pylori. But nonetheless, I think because of some insufficiency and because of the H. pylori, like you were just a little more vulnerable for an overgrowth. So you got, somehow, you got exposed. And so you got this one. This one I tend to see more with intestinal inflammation, specifically. But nonetheless, yes, I would say one overgrowth is not a like, oh my gosh. It's usually, okay, and this is what I say with any overgrowth, one overgrowth or 10 overgrowths. Now, granted, that's a big difference, if we have overgrowth, this is where I focus on root causes. Why do we have overgrowth? And so this is where I dig into what are the things creating the opportunity. So one of those would be insufficiency dysbiosis. So not enough healthy bacteria. You don't have a thick enough barrier, right? One would be digestion's being off, so your digestive insufficiency. So with H. pylori, I don't even need to look at your digestion markers. If you have overgrown H. pylori, you have digestive insufficiency. It 99.9% of the time causes hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid, and that ultimately makes you a petri dish. If you don't have enough healthy bacteria, that makes you a petri dish. If you have inflammation in the gut, that makes you a petri dish. And if you don't have a strong enough immune system, which as I recall, you didn't at the time, then you don't have enough protection there either. So those are the biggest four for me. There are other things that can make you more vulnerable, but when we have overgrowth, this is where I pause and say, okay, let's go look at things and see why we're vulnerable because I don't want to treat an overgrowth or even just treat the H. pylori without figuring out why we're vulnerable because then we're treating it for it to potentially come right back.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. The thing I will say is, um, sometimes, and I've looked at not nearly as many GI maps as you, but sometimes people may not have symptoms, and sometimes I feel they don't want to pull the trigger and do the GI map. I would say that this is probably equally or as more important than just doing, a blood sample and getting an idea of what's going on because your intestinal health markers are going to impact hormones and all the other things that you talked about. So I would say anybody who hasn't done a GI map, who is in the program, or people just watching it, I think this is a great place to start is looking at the gut. And then if you want to do blood work in conjunction with it, it's not a bad idea either. But just know a lot of influence from your blood work is from this systemic. If you have systemic inflammation or dysbiotic overgrowth, that's probably causing some of those issues on your blood work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely biased a little bit because I do it all the time, but I say if you can, I would literally have everybody do a GI map, and even like semi-frequently. Like, I mean, I do one on myself probably once a year or close to it. It influenced so many things, not just your digestion. So I for sure have had people come in that don't have digestive issues, but maybe they have a lot going on in there, and so that is affecting hormones, it's affecting skin health, it's affecting your brain. I mean, GI has such a close tie to your brain on brain fog, on fatigue, on memory, on depression, on anxiety. And so when I do these, I go down the gauntlet. Like, yeah, tell me about your digestion for sure. Tell me about your hormones. Tell me about your blood work. Tell me about how you're sleeping. Tell me about your skin. Tell me because it influences all of those things. And so I'm not saying it's like gold. And if we fix your gut, you're not going to have any of those issues, but it might be, it's a great place to start because if your gut's imbalanced, it's going to be so much harder to fix your thyroid or your blood sugar or your hormones. And so we need that to be robust and strong to deal with the other things. It also could be the cause of the other things being off. A little bit of a chicken and egg thing.
Absolutely. And I was consulting with a woman yesterday, and she has all these adrenal issues, and everybody's down here trying to fix her diurnal pattern, but she has all these GI issues. And I'm like, well, if you have any GI issues which creating inflammation, we have to take into account like your intrinsic nervous system, so your gut to brain access. So you probably are dealing with some neuroinflammation, which is going to impact your body's ability to release all of those hormones appropriately. So I think a lot of times you're right on the money. Like the chicken before the egg or the horse before the cart is like if you are looking at that end fate, we really need to go further upstream and address what's going on. So, for everybody in this call, just to remember, all your hormones are made in your brain. So, if you're having hormonal dysfunction, that's cortisol, thyroid, sex hormones, your GI, your gut, and your brain are going to have a lot of interplay together, and that's why I really like this test. And I'm glad that I've learned so much about it and just how it bleeds into other areas. So. This is awesome. We don't have to, there's a ton of bacteria here. I don't want to go over all of these. Let's come down and let's look at the intestinal health markers.
Yeah, before we say that, I'll just say one other thing, just as an overview. This area also tells me a story. So it tells me a big story. So it's not just like if you had three overgrowths, it's not just like, oh, we have three different overgrowths. The overgrowths themselves and how they relate to each other tell me a story about what's going on. And so it matters like what combination of bacteria are overgrown and how it impacts you. And it tells me, like, that's why I love getting a lot of detail on what everything somebody is experiencing in terms of weight loss and all these things because certain ones, interact with each other in certain ways. So anyway, just thought I'd say that.
Yeah, awesome. Parasites, we
Oh,
don't have to go.
yeast. Yeah. I mean, this can wreak a lot of havoc too. If you have yeast overgrowth, parasites can wreak a lot of havoc too. Some of them are asymptomatic and they can still wreak a lot of havoc. So just other things to work through for sure.
At this time, things that I was dealing with, so I would say my beta glucuronidase is probably this low because I was using things to inhibit that. So for people on this call who may not know what that is, that's a reabsorption enzyme. That's a lot of impact, but it can affect reabsorption of toxins and uh, hormones. And me specifically, I was having a lot of estrogen overload. So I was supplementing heavy to lower the beta glucuronidase. I was using calcium to glucarate. I would assume if I wasn't doing something like that, this would be much higher. But when I was talking with you with my H. pylori, my secretory IgA being so low, that's showing that immune function, correct? And potentially very low immunity, which is probably impacting all of those other areas that I was talking about at the beginning of the call.
Yeah, so that's one of the things when I talked earlier about having like looking for those root causes. I mean, this I could just glance at this and be like, this is like one of this and digestion, which could have been again chicken and egg thing, but like could have been caused by the H. pylori, which probably pulled his elastase down. But yeah, secretory IgA, it's an immunoglobulin. Its job is to help protect the inside from the outside. If it is not helping protect, then again, that is creating more of a petri dish or opportunity for overgrowth. And so this, yeah, I mean, this helps protect against opportunistic, pathogenic, opportunistic microbes. And there can be a lot of reasons this pulls down. Obviously gut barrier for sure, but like decreased commensal, so not having enough healthy bacteria can pull this down. Chronic stress can pull this down. This sounds crazy, but a germ-free environment. So like if you are a hypochondriac and you like never, you like over clean and bleach everything and aren't exposed to enough, your immune system isn't robust there either. Protein malnutrition can pull this down if you're not getting enough protein. So a lot of those things, and then yeah, it just creates more of an opportunity. This is also one that's closely tied with glucose metabolism. So I often see dysfunctional glucose metabolism here as well. Intestinal inflammation, diseases, more prone to allergies, more prone to colds, stuff like that. So really beefing up the immune system and that gut barrier are going to be really important so that, we wouldn't just want to treat the H. pylori and the overgrowth and not be addressing the gut barrier and immune system and digestion.
And with the elastase one, even though it's in the green, usually it's recommended to be what, like north of 700. Am I correct there? So even though it's, so say somebody gets this test done, but they have a practitioner who will charge them for it, but necessarily doesn't know how to read it. Because I actually run into that with pretty much everybody coming into this program is they've shelled out thousands of dollars to other practitioners, and no, they're like, oh, I have the results, but everybody they said it's normal. I think there's caveats in a lot of this, and other things are going to impact things. So just because things are green or things aren't completely out of range doesn't mean that they're like within a functional optimal range. So I always like to point out that elastase because that tends to be something that someone's like, well, on paper it doesn't show that it's low, but technically we probably want it higher than that. Am I correct?
Oh, 100%. And this is actually one of the ones that I see if it's right there, and I'll say they're specific. I've seen it a lot when it's like on that low side of green or high side of yellow or whatever that people are experiencing. And this is one that contributes a lot to bloating and a lot to malabsorption. So, I mean, and so this, which again creates more opportunity for your body not to like protect itself. And so it doesn't look that bad here, but I would say if I see that there, I'm like, you're probably bloated. You're probably not digesting food well. You probably have some abdominal discomfort, and or low stomach acid. This is one that often, again, we were looking at a chicken and egg thing because you have the H. pylori, but this often can be a trigger for low stomach acid too, which again can feel like reflux or just you're not digesting your food well, so you're not absorbing your food well. And especially for people on this call, if you're not digesting and absorbing your food and nutrients well, it's going to be a lot harder to burn fat. So
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing, if you're good here, I wanted to go down and look at the antibiotic resistant genes. And something I want to say with this is my mom overexposed me to antibiotics, and it's not her fault. We used to get Z-Packs from Mexico from one of my aunts, and anytime I was sick with anything, my mom always gave my antibiotics. I think it's really interesting because of my digestive issues at a young age. When you see antibiotic resistant genes, uh, I'm curious on this. Is some of that a hereditary component, or is that potentially an overexposure at certain periods of your life? If you know, I'm unsure.
I don't know anything about that hereditary piece, and I'll be honest, my just gut reaction would say it's probably not as hereditary and more just your gene activation, but I would absolutely think that exposure makes a big difference.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so I think that another reason I really like this test is the allopathic way of treating H. pylori is with an antibiotic, right? So they could be treating you with an antibiotic that you already have resistant genes to. So you may not even be able to clear up your H. pylori by going to your doctor and doing that blood or breath test because they're not sure of what genes you're resistant to. So I think that's another reason why this test is so valuable.
And another thing on that, just to say it, like H. pylori, I mean, it can be stubborn to treat, but I will say, yes, of course, antibiotics are in theory faster. But two things I'll say about that: one, we're treating fire with fire, so you're like creating havoc on the intestine with antibiotics, even though we're trying to treat something else. And so, like that, I'm not saying all bad. Sometimes there's a time and a place that I actually think it's a wise choice, but just being mindful if you can treat it other way, great. The other thing to think about that, the H. pylori specifically, the antibiotic treatment is pretty rough. It's a triple antibiotic treatment, and it is, I mean, it's a rough like 10 to 14 days. So anyway, just so you know.
No, thank you so much for going in depth on that. We have Angela dropped a message here in the chat. A GI doc said that blood tests would still show antibodies even after successful treatment of H. pylori. Breath or stool would be the best to assess treatment success. I know Angela has a medical background as well, so I think that's good information there for everybody on this call. We have just a couple minutes left. I wanted to pause and see if anybody had any specific questions around uh, GI mapping, digestion, or anything. Feel free to shoot from the hip. I always like to give a couple minutes here and see how we can provide value for you. I think we had such a rich conversation here. Everybody's mind's blown.
I have a question. This is just for anyone who's listening and wondering, like, well, I can't do a GI map. I'm seeing that H. pylori is pretty prevalent in a lot of people. What could I do outside of just food? What are some simple supplements I could be doing to help naturally keep my stomach healthy since it's like the first line of defense in our bodies? So we could throw out some options for people that they could maybe incorporate outside of just obviously clean eating and environmental factors to help the stomach keep
Yeah, I mean,
nice and
and I'll
clean.
I'll, I'll kind of say actually cleaning is a great defense. And so that's actually what I would say. I mean, there is a H. pylori diet that I recommend for people. Let's just say somebody has it at a high normal level, but they're not having a lot of symptoms. I will for sure recommend a H. pylori diet. Interesting, the H. pylori diet is high in fruits, veggies, and fiber and polyphenols. Yes, there are specific fruits and veggies and fiber that are more protective, and there are certain things that impact it more. So, like things that impact it are going to be salt, high nickel, which is like cocoa, chocolate, soybeans, fermented foods, which is interesting, whatever, because I know they're good for you, but also if you have H. pylori, it can be aggravating. So, alcohol. So a lot of things that we probably know. Sometimes it's just knowing that we need to do them less. Coffee is another one that can aggravate H. pylori. But generally speaking, H. pylori or overgrowth, some of the best things you can be doing is high fiber, 25 to 30 grams a day, lots of polyphenols, berries, grapes, spinach, broccoli, onions, legumes, nuts, and seeds. I mean, those are some of the best things you can do. The other things, again, gut protection, low stress. And I'm not saying, yes, please, if you can get rid of stress, please do. But processing stress daily, everybody, please do. I know it's hard, but like do your meditations, do your mindfulness, do your yoga, whatever. It makes a really big difference on your gut. So I would say those are some of the big things. How are you processing stress? What are you eating? If you can minimize antibiotics, please do. If you have to take them, make sure you take a probiotic. Ask somebody what kind you should take, and when you should take it. Sleep, water. I mean, I know that all those are healthy things, but they all have a really big impact on the gut.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, your piece around coffee and fermented foods. And I think that's a thing that I noticed the most when I had H. pylori is as soon as I drink a cup of coffee, and TMI, but I think the majority of the people on this call I've met and I've talked about this, like I was having like immediate like emptying of bowel, and it was something that was completely abnormal for me. And it was like very frequent. So that's why I was starting to get worried about my GI tract. The other pieces I was having, um, like overly ripe bananas sometimes, or avocado, or kimchi, and I was getting histamine responses. And I think a lot of times if we have that low stomach barrier, we're going to be pushing stuff out of the gut, and that's where we can get those immune-based responses. So I think that those are just potentially things someone could think about and keep an open mind is like, yeah, I think I may have digestive issues when I consume these certain foods. Am I having that type of reaction? And that may help put some pieces together of things maybe just to avoid. That's free and easy to do. Well, awesome. If we don't have anything else, I'll give everybody 5 minutes back. Ashley, thank you so much. This was very informative. I'm sure this replay will get tons of views. And yeah, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. See ya.